Ty Cobb was anything but a Georgia peach. Ernest Hemingway called him manure. Paul Gallico said his life read like a gothic horror tale. And according to Damon Runyon, Joe DiMaggio once whispered, "Here comes God," as Cobb walked into a Manhattan saloon. However one describes him, few would argue with General Douglas MacArthur's assessment that Ty Cobb left a deep imprint on the pages of American Times.
Cobb played in a time in which baseball was fundamentally about intimidation. No one else in that very intimidating game was comfortable saying, "All right, I'll take on the world." Cobb was very comfortable doing that. Choose up sides, me on one side, the world on the other. He's happy. He thought that was a fair battle.
There were fights not only between players, but also between players and the crowd. The crowd was very close to the field in those days, and you could hear everything they were saying. And it was not unusual for players to argue back with fans and sometimes to jump into the stands. The worst cases seemed to always come up with Ty Cobb.
The most notorious encounter that he had with a fan was in May of 1912 in New York. This guy was riding Cobb particularly hard on this occasion. One of the things he yelled out was that, something to the effect that all you Southern boys are half niggers anyhow. Cobb started beating him up, knocked him down, started stomping on him. People yell out, "This guy doesn't have any hands." And Cobb said, "I don't care if he doesn't have any hands. I don't care if he doesn't have any feet," and kept beating up on him.
There was a maniacal aspect to Ty Cobb, and he was willing to fight anybody, including people who could beat the hell out of him.
Moriarty, the great umpire, was umpiring one day. They had an argument, so they went under the stands, and they had a slugfest, and I think they fought to a draw.
And incidentally, on 3 occasions, I guess, and Moriarty whipped him each time. But Ty would come back and still fight him.
Ty Cobb was sitting in the Yankee dugout one day, and this guy this Yankee player come through, and he said, "Why don't you get in your own dugout, you no good son of a..." And Ty Cobb's eyes just lit up. He jumped in the batter's box to start the batting practice, and the Yankee players were all in their dugout. He hit the next 16 balls in the Yankee dugout.
In 1907, his 3rd season with the Tigers, Cobb's aberrant behavior reached a new low.
Cobb came onto the spring training field one afternoon, and he was displeased with the condition of the field. He started berating a black groundskeeper. The guy answered back, and Cobb beat him up. The guy's wife came to his assistance, and Cobb started pummeling her.
Cobb's difficulties were not confined to the field.
3 guys tried to mug him and his wife on the way to the railroad station.
One of them pulled a knife and cut him. Cobb, who always carried a gun, pulled the gun out and started to shoot the guy. The gun misfired, but he pistol whipped 2 of them. He actually caught 2 of the muggers and pistol whipped them.
Cobb went on and said goodbye to his wife and got on the train, and the trainer of the Tigers saw that the back of his suit coat was bloody, so the trainer patched him up. He went ahead and played in a meaningless game, and as I recall, got a couple of hits.
With a will to win that bordered on dementia, Cobb led the Tigers to their 3rd straight pennant in 1909.
Ty Cobb says you win no matter how. We know about Rose bumping into that catcher and knocking him out. No. Ty Cobb would kill these guys to win a game.
Cobb found a moral equivalent of war on the baseball field. Players would say, the one thing we didn't want to do was get Cobb mad at us, because he'd be all that much better if he was mad.
He played hard as he could play and run as fast as he could and pick up his spikes as high as he could so he'd knock you down and laugh if you got hurt.
When he'd get on first base, he'd yell to the next man, he'd say, "I'm coming in full speed with my feet up and my spikes sharp."
Using his spikes as weapons, Cobb owned the base paths, finishing his career with 892 thefts, a record that endured 49 years.
He did sharpen them. I saw him in the clubhouse. He had a bench over there, and he said, "I don't sharpen these to cut anybody. I just want my part of that plate when I go in there, and if they don't give it to me, I'll take it."
He would almost maim an opposing ball player in order to get an extra base.
He would be on base, and Hannes Wagner, he would yell out, "I'm coming down there, you damn Dutchman, and I'm going to just knock you ass over tea kettle right now. First pitch, I'm coming." And Wagner, who was a charmer, would say, "Come on, I'm waiting."
He would announce that he was going to go down and steal 2nd, and he would do it. And then he would announce that he was going to steal 3rd, and then he would announce that he was going to steal home.
If he terrorized the league, He also played the game better than anyone else in the dead ball era. He captured a record 12 batting titles, hit over 403 times, and scored the most runs in Major League history.
If Babe Ruth was not the greatest ball player who ever lived, Ty Cobb was by far.
It would be more than enough if such praise were due simply to Cobb's fierce approach to the game. What makes his life a testament to ambition and courage is that he overcame the darkest of family tragedies.
SportsCentury's 50 Greatest Athletes is presented by Oldsmobile and your local Oldsmobile dealers. Also brought to you by Budweiser. Now is the perfect time to enjoy a brewery fresh, Beechwood-aged Budweiser. By Lincoln Financial Group. Lincoln Financial Group, clear solutions in a complex world. And by Nike.
Ty Cobb was born up in the foothills of the Smokies in northern Georgia, 21 years after the Civil War came to an end, which is significant in itself. I mean, he was still very much part of the South that had fought the Civil War.
Anybody from the North was a damn Yankee, you know, and I guess Cobb inherited that naturally.
He grew up with this notion of personal honor. He didn't take insults. That there were certain things that you simply would not put up with, and that the resort to physical violence was appropriate.
In that time, in that place, still torn by the cataclysm of the Civil War, young Tyrus Raymond Cobb took quickly to the lessons of Southern manhood.
Classes in schools used to have spelling bees. A boy missed a word, and the boys' side lost the spelling bee, and Cobb was furious, and he, out on the playground, beat the boy up. He had lost.
For Cobb, the only thing more painful than defeat was his father's disapproval.
His father was a very dominant, demanding man, insisted on things, had rigid rules, all the rest of it. Praised Cobb, wanted him to do this and that. I think Cobb spent all his life trying to live up to what his father wanted him to do for him.
Cobb found primary outlet for all of this nervous tension and determination and competitiveness on the baseball field, and was determined to become a professional baseball player, was something which his father opposed.
He wanted him to be a doctor. He wanted Ty to go to college and be a doctor, and he was not very fond of the idea at all.
Finally, Dr. Cobb realized that Ty was going to be a baseball player. He said, go and do your best, but don't come home a failure. And he said, that stayed with me all of my life. Don't come home a failure.
With that admonition and $90 in his pocket, the 17-year-old hard-nosed headed for the minor leagues, where he soon began beating the publicity drum to his own advantage.
Grantland Rice was in the sports editor of the Atlanta Journal, and he kept getting these messages from some fellow in Anderson, Alabama, about this hot kid over here named Cobb. And he got about 5 or 6 of them, and eventually found out they were coming from Cobb himself.
And Rice went to Anniston, Alabama, and found out that Ty Cobb was right in those telegrams that he was sending anonymously. This was one hell of a ball player. With Grantland Rice's affirmation, Cobb could legitimately dream of playing in the big leagues with his father sitting proudly in the stands. But half of that dream was shattered beyond repair on August 9, 1905.
He was playing for Augusta. He was in the outfield, and they called him in, and he had a telegram. And that was the darkest day of his life, he said, when he had a telegram that his mother had shot and killed his father.
His father suspected his mother of philandering. And he came back from an alleged trip away a day early and sneaked into the bedroom window to try and catch his wife.
She said she heard this rattling on the porch roof, and she got the shotgun. She saw this shadowy figure out there, and she fired once, and then she fired again. She shot him in the stomach, and then she shot him in the face and pretty much blew his brains out.
And this was a devastating thing for Ty Cobb, who was only 17 years old or 18 years old at the time, to confront. And the stories go that he went absolutely berserk.
3 weeks later, Cobb made his debut with the Detroit Tigers, hitting a double in his first at-bat. But haunted by his father's death, he finished the season with a .240 batting average.
The incident left Cobb with an image, as he said, of his father always watching him. He could not fail because he thought that his father disapproved of his ball-playing career, and he was going to show him.
and then started a career wherein he demonstrated a continuing terror that never ended.
In 1906, Cobb's troubles mounted. His mother's murder trial wore heavily on him through the spring, and as the season came on, so did a brutal initiation.
In those days, veterans on the club never treated rookies with any respect. As a matter of fact, they did everything they could to intimidate them.
Ty would come into the clubhouse and find his favorite bat, saw it into two. He would find his uniform or his civilian clothes tied into knots or thrown into a bucket of water.
That was a very rough-hewn period in American history. A lot of the players were ex-cons. I mean, they were not exactly Mark McGuire, son of dentist.
There was one player on the team, a catcher, whose name was Schmidt, whose job it was to beat Cobb up every once in a while just to keep him in line.
He really did work him over. He broke his nose and closed both of his eyes, and he couldn't play baseball for 3 days because Charlie Schmidt really gave him a good whipping.
He made it worse himself by his behavior. He was pugnacious, he was cocky, he was a 19-year-old rookie who thought he was the greatest ball player who ever lived. Now, he may have been, but his teammates didn't know that.
Cobb hit .341 through June, while his mother was acquitted on all murder charges. Still, the accumulative effect of a family tragedy and intense hazing by his teammates pushed Cobb into a sanitarium for mental and physical exhaustion in July.
There are stories that say he also was operated on for an ulcer, but none of these have ever really been nailed down. During those 6 weeks, he was not allowed at all to follow baseball or, frankly, even to follow most of what was going on in the city of Detroit. He was supposed to be totally secluded and isolated.
The next year, Cobb wreaked havoc across the American League, his .350 average winning the first of 9 consecutive batting titles. In 1909, he won the Triple Crown while leading the league in steals.
The dominant style of play had come to be this very closely played kind of baseball where you scratched for a run here and a run there, and you got runs any way you could.
You did wondrous things on the baseline. You would steal bases, you would steal signals, you would steal home.
This guy carried inside skillful, thoughtful, pugnacious, ferocious baseball to the highest possible degree.
He said, never aim for his hands, aim for his wrists. You can get the ball out by hitting his wrists.
Between 1910 and 1919, Cobb never hit below .368, reaching a high of .420 in 1911. In 1915, he stole 96 bases, a record that would endure 47 years. But Cobb's cut-and-slash style of play would soon be eclipsed by a new kind of star.
Cobb was the greatest player of the 19th century. He simply happened to play in the 20th. Ruth invented a new style of play that, to our eyes, looks a lot better than what Cobb was doing. In 1919, when Ruth hit the 29 home runs, in 1920, when he hit 54, and 21, when he hit 59 and just exploded, Cobb was suddenly off stage. He was not an important figure. He was more of a museum piece, and he wasn't a great ball player anymore.
Cobb felt like he was Mr. Science in baseball, and Babe Ruth was Mr. Brute Force. And it was brute force taking over for the scientific part of baseball, and Cobb probably resented that not only on a personal basis, but on the basis of what it was doing to the game.
He and Babe Ruth didn't like each other as players. They scrapped all day long. Every time they played against each other, I could hear them hollering back and forth.
Mr. Ruth walked by Mr. Cobb one time after hitting a home run and said, "You want to tell me how to hit?" Mr. Cobb said, "No, but I'll show you."
Cobb said to the sports writers before the game one day, "I can do this, watch." And he goes out and hits 5 home runs in 2 days. And he said, "You see, I can do that." Then he went back to playing baseball the way he thought it ought to be played. Well, the era had passed him by. Ruth had changed the game irrevocably, but Cobb could have done it. He was just that good.
As the nation watched Babe Ruth hit 47 homers in 1926, Cobb became the subject of negative headlines.
Ty Cobb and Tris Speaker were accused by an ex-teammate of fixing games. The American League president wanted to throw them out of baseball.
It was really traumatic for a lot of people. They simply could not believe that these two great players would have done this. The outcome of it all was that Commissioner Landis decided he would conduct his own separate investigation.
Not anxious to see baseball return to the dark days of the 1919 Black Sox scandal, Commissioner Landis dismissed the charges against Cobb and Speaker, citing lack of evidence.
But they were too big. They were too big for Landis. He didn't dare take them on. So, suspicion to the contrary, he just gave them a pass.
Cobb played his final 2 seasons with the Philadelphia Athletics, retiring in 1928 with 4,191 hits. His lifetime .367 batting average remains the highest of all time. With a wife and 5 children, Cobb now faced the difficult prospect of containing his anger without the outlet of baseball. When we return, Ty Cobb's final years, a mix of pain and bizarre behavior.
SportsCentury's 50 Greatest Athletes is presented by Oldsmobile and your local Oldsmobile dealers. Also brought to you by Wheaties, the breakfast of champions. By Burger King, when you have it your way, it just tastes better. And by MCI, 5 cents every day.
Cobb retired to the place of his origin to live in the grand old style. As a millionaire, he could well afford it.
Cobb embraced risk. He embraced risk in all of life, not merely on the ball field. Investing in Coca-Cola, investing in General Motors in 1909. These are risky moves. Coca-Cola was started in Georgia, and he was advised by the founders of the company that this thing was going to take off and was going to replace a drink called Moxie, which was the big soft drink at the time. Cobb bought shares for pennies and became a multimillionaire.
In 1939, Cobb was among the first class inducted into the Hall of Fame, receiving more votes than his historical nemesis, Babe Ruth.
Well, this is a great day in my life. I'm very happy to be here, and I feel greatly honored.
Assuming the role of a Southern gentleman, Cobb mugged with Golden Age luminaries. But after an acrimonious divorce in 1947, in which his wife claimed physical violence, his competitive fires raged.
He's a fellow who was playing golf at Augusta National one day, and the group in front of him was playing a little slowly. Cobb hollered out, "If you guys can't move the hell out of the way and let somebody through and play golf," words to that effect. So they invited him to come on and play through. He played through President Eisenhower and his foursome.
He had a son of a bitch list, and he would write down the names of people. He included everybody from his ex-wives to Eleanor Roosevelt to Kennesaw Mountain Landis.
He played in an old-timers game. It was the last time he was ever on the field. About 62 years old in Yankee Stadium. And he got up there, lead-off batter, and he turned around and looked at the catcher. He says, "Back up just one step, because I shouldn't even be out here. What am I doing 62 years old and out here?" So when I gets back in the box, pitch comes in, first pitch, bunts it and beats it out.
At a banquet some years later, Cobb was wounded by some return fire from a predictable quarter.
As Cobb started to speak, one of the ex-Tiger players was sitting at a plate with him, sitting at our table. "Sit down, you selfish jerk," he says. "You never did fit in with us." I thought they were kidding. They meant it. And Cobb finally got embarrassed and sat down. It was one of the most embarrassing things I'd ever seen.
Hey, that's Smokey Joe Wood. And Mel Ott. And Gil Hodges.
And Ty Cobb wanted to play. None of us could stand a son of a bitch when we were alive, so we told him to stick it.
It is unfortunate that Cobb's persona has been entirely swallowed by its uglier elements. There are dozens of stories about Cobb's graciousness.
He was always very good to ball players down on their luck. You know, there was no pension for ball players in those days. He took care of ball players on the side, sending them checks, sometimes under a pseudonym or through a third party.
In 1948, he built a hospital in dedication to the memory of his parents, but no act of generosity could soften the old warhorse's reputation. Divorced for the second time in 1956, Cobb was left alone.
I'd go to see him, and I sat there one day, and he said, "Jimmy, my boy, I've got cancer. I've got cancer."
I spent 3 days with him, And ever so often he'd have to get up and go to the kitchen and take his medicine. Well, about the second or third day, the medicine began to smell like bourbon. And the third day he invited me to go join him. And by the time the day was over, we were both happy.
Medicating his pain ever more heavily, Cobb's erratic behavior often descended into the bizarre.
You call that driving, Alice? My sister can drive better than that. Step on it. Let's go. Let's go.
He was dying of cancer. He was on drugs. He was boozing. And the man was out of his mind.
At the last, when he was so old and cranky, knew he was going to die, he said he wished he had done things differently during his baseball career.
4 days before he died, I went out to see him, and the nurses told me that he's slipping, said he won't last long. When I looked down and talked to him, I said, Mr. Cobb, this is Jimmy, and the only way I can believe that he knew it was me is when I said I was going to leave him, and he faintly mashed my hand, very faintly, and that was the last time I ever saw him alive.
There were over 300 people at the funeral, but only 3 ball players. The one thing that's never mentioned is that the 3 ball players there had all been taken care of by Cobb quietly for years.
All the Little League boys had the uniforms on, and they had an honor guard, so to speak, all the way from the entrance to the cemetery, all the way to the burial site.
Through the long lens of history, Cobb's legacy is distorted by the violent way he played the game.
A really strong case can be made for Cobb still as being the greatest ball player who ever lived. And yet, one of the great lessons of Cobb is that it proves that no amount of greatness in sports can permanently whitewash the character of the athlete.
Cobb, in my eyes, is probably one of the most mean-spirited athletes that ever lived. But you have to give the devil his due.
He tried so hard to win, and that was the object of the game, to win. He asked no favors, and he gave no quarter.
In retirement, Cobb grew ever more reclusive and bizarre, spending his days between 2 palatial homes without electricity or telephone. When he entered the hospital for the last time in 1961, he dumped a paper bag containing stocks and bonds worth $1 million and a loaded black Luger on his nightstand. One was proof of his financial success, the other a symbol of how he played the game.
This has been a presentation of ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports. For more, log on to ESPN.com, a part of the Go Network. Go.com.